hope that that was like an okay transition. Kobe, you were kind of like you brought up Mali like kind of like quickly, and you brought up like India a little bit here. Could you try to do like a few minutes on what you have seen about Mali? You mentioned that there was a military coup prior, but it was kind of like it's such a weird flowing show, and it happened like very quickly. Could you kind of like walk through that a little bit once again? And before you do, give a follow to Bleep Blomp Ben. Give a follow to Kobe_Bobby. We're going to be doing this every Saturday morning, beginning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And there is room at the moment right now for one more person to come and join on if anybody is a smaller streamer that wants to come be a part. Also,
Sure.
Ben, I don't know how long you're streaming for, but it's exclamation mark shout out Kobe_Kobe. If you are going to be streaming for a long time, just don't raid me because I don't exactly know how long I would be going. So go ahead, Kobe.
Okay, okay. I was just trying to think of a term for India. India, Bengal, swamp region, something like this. There's like a specific name for it. The Sundarbans. This is what I'm thinking about. Why am I talking about the Sundarbans? I'll put this in the. This is a mangrove region in the Bengal state of India. And why I was thinking about this is because I recently saw a thread on Twitter that was talking about how much biodiversity has died in the region since basically, I mean, there had not been a lot of interest in like tracking all the different animals there in the ancient history, and so 1850s forward, people started looking and really looking at the biodiversity of the region and categorizing all the different plants, at least in English, and tracking it. And the biodiversity in this region has just plummeted. And there's another region where the exact same thing has happened, which is the Niger Delta region in North Africa, which is the region that the water region that feeds like all those African states, or at least everything that's not like the Nile over there. And this is something that guides my foreign policy, which is climate change. I'm seeing over and over again, both in my readings of ancient history and in medieval history and stuff, and in pre-modern history and in modern history, is that it seems as if the single greatest motivator of human beings is our material conditions, how we get the things that we need, and who gives those things, and how those things are organized. And it seems as if one of the biggest determiners of that, is that the word, that we typically don't have a lot of immediate control over, is the climate. And more that our climate is being degraded because of the incredibly unequal distribution of resources and the incredibly unsustainable ways that we have historically done, extracted resources and made things go boom and make things go forward and create the things that we need. We are finding ourselves in a situation in which the places in the world that historically have been the bread baskets and have been the cradles of humanity are now becoming barren deserts in places that people don't really can't live at all because of either the barren deserts or they're livable, but the climate is so erratic and so it's unlivable, right? And those two places are North Africa and the Indian subcontinent. Generally, Indian subcontinent is the entire place there, from Bangladesh over kind of Myanmar. These are two places that are there's no other way of saying it. These are the cradles of civilization. Modern historians believe that basically human beings started in the Sudan, Ethiopia region. We moved up to the some of us moved up to the Anatolian region, and then some of us moved down to the Indus Valley region. And those are the three places that we can find the oldest civilizations on Earth. The ancient Stonehenges in I believe ancient Stonehenge actually I think in Zimbabwe. But anyways, these are the places that historically have been where human beings we have come from, and we have had the roots of our civilizations, and they're unlivable. And so I have just there's something about this that is as both an emotional and very kind of intellectual as made me very emotional and very kind of piqued my interest. And what I've noticed is that in the past 50 years, both these places have been incredibly politically tumultuous. And so let's talk about the two main areas that's going on right now. Mali, the reason why I just brought that up is because it just happened. Let me bring up the map of Mali here so I can kind of
Can you
do.
try real quick to unplug your microphone one time and then plug it back in? It's just some kind of static. Ben,
Absolutely.
did you have something to say?
Absolutely.
And while he's doing that, I want to double down on what he was saying, because like I have a lot of familiar with like the Lake Chad region, and that really is the I mean, with the Lake Chad region, they're heavily dependent on fishing. You have a lot of communities that were heavily dependent on fishing, and now all of a sudden Lake Chad is literally drying up. And so like the state boundaries sort of between like Niger and Cameroon and all the countries that are sort of surround the Lake Chad region are sort of falling apart to a lot of extremism that's really boiling up. And like really able to spread because a lot of people have lost their ability to sustain their existence. Not to mention the oil pipelines that kind of run through that region. And so you have a lot of like basically armed conflict over like the scarce resources at that point in time, basically. And it's very, very troubling to say the very least. To say the very least.
Yeah, I don't have much to add at the moment. Well, I guess I could. I mean, if we're talking about like water problems, they don't only exist off the continent of North America. They exist here too. You know, I think that most of us would probably be in agreement that we are absolutely devastating our water table in the Midwest, and you know we're probably going to be running into, I would say, agricultural problems in what is the breadbasket of the United States. It seems that the aquifers are continuously depleting at a faster and faster rate. It seems like we're having, you know, very big water problems in California as well. Whether it's, you know, the joke that you're making from Donnie T, or the actual just the shipping of all the water from Northern California down to like LA, Bay Area, and so forth. So to anybody like out there, you know, the fight for water, the fight for clean water, the fight for agriculture, the fight for, you know, fishing waters. You know, fishing waters is like another big thing that's going on right now. Or the fight for, you know, underwater minerals and materials. You can see what's happening right now between Cyprus, Greece, and Turkey, where they're trying to fight to get you know, an ability to mine these natural gas resources that they think are down at the bottom of the ocean. You see a battle right now going on between Israel and Lebanon over a maritime fishing strip that also happens to be very heavily having geological resources underneath for excavation. And the United States is going to be the mediator, so wonder how that one's going to go. If that betrays which way I think that it's going to fall. And yeah, I think it's at least good that some people are like discussing water to the importance that they are at the moment right now. So I'm actually really happy that you brought this up to frame that way. There's also the GERD dam that Ethiopia is trying to construct on the Blue Nile. You're going to continue to see over the next decade more and more people are going to try to develop maybe hydroelectricity or dams or so forth. But then you can look over to China, and what happens when you build a dam? Well, you know, then you're changing downstream water systems, you're changing mineral flows, you're changing ecosystems, you're changing the ecology, you're potentially wiping out the flora and fauna, like you're about to bring up again, Kobe. So then you have Nestle, who's just like, oh no, we're just gonna bottle everything up and we're gonna sell it to you. So go ahead as you were.
Yeah, I'm still learning. Learning the voice meter software, so I'm
Oh, it's
changing just
much
the
better
default
now.
mic.
No,
Do I
it's
sound
much
sound
better.
fine?
Yep,
Okay,
there was just a crackle
perfect.
before, but there's no
Okay,
crackle
perfect.
anymore.
Okay, so just to go back, so Mali, Mali's a North African state. It was it was colonized by France, and before that, it had a very long-running Islamic series of Islamic caliphates, and I mean, technically, caliphate is like an expanding empire, I think, and emirate is like when it's not expanding. I don't know the whole thing. Emirates, they different names. Islamic kind of societies, various types. Some of them, but the way that it worked is that some of them were very nomadic. The places in the north region, if you look at a map of Mali, Mali has kind of a small little funky region in the bottom left hand corner. It kind of looks like a tumor, and then a large region with weird straight borders up in the northwest of the or should be northeast of the country. That all that area is just desert, and the people that live there are various ethnic groups that are historically, historically nomadic, historically identify as Talrig, which is a non-black African ethnic group. They identify as being more connected to Berbers, which kind of view themselves as their own thing. And in these groups, there are a lot of separatist and nationalist movements that want to have their own state. I believe it's called Awazad. It has previously existed for about a year in the early 2000s, but it wasn't recognized by anybody. It was basically just like a rebel offshoot. But they get categorized by both the French government and by the Malian government as being just jihadists, ISIS, Al Qaeda. It is true that Al Qaeda is mainly Talrig. There's not many other groups that are affiliated with ISIS in the region and Al Qaeda in the region. But it is also not true that many of the groups are just nationalist movements. They're nationalists in the sense that they would like a country. They have their goods and bads. That's just. But they're not necessarily Islamists. Like in that regard. This recent coup is basically because many of the people in the military and many of the people in the cities in the west of the region, where most of the population live, who are non-Tawrig, identify as Black African, they feel as if they're being exploited, that they're fighting a forever war, that they're fighting against, that they're fighting the wars of, fighting the wars for colonial powers, where they're fighting, that they get sent up into the north to fight Al Qaeda, which is something that they feel was brought to the region by French colonialists and American cowboys in the Middle East. And the current coup removed the government, the old president Kite, who was put in by the previous coup, which was for the similar region. They felt in the early 2000s, the people felt that they were not doing enough to fight against the jihadists. They couped him, put in a new government that was a little bit more hardline on that, and now they're saying, well, no, you're not doing it correctly. We'll get you out of there. The movement that got the president out, the People's Movement, was called the M5 movement. I think it stood for like the March 5th movement or something like this, or the May 5th movement. I'm not sure. It was some date, they ousted the president, the military took over, and then the military ousted the People's Movement. And for the first couple weeks, there was kind of a tumultuous situation where Mali was getting some sanctions put on them by the ECOWAS, which is a trade union or trade bloc in the East Africa there, and they basically fast forwarded their interim president cycle to get somebody to hold the country together while they get a new president. And as of right now, they have a interim president who I believe is military, kind of like half military, half civilian kind of guy, not like official military. And they have had the sanctions lifted off of them. Some of the other countries are saying that good things are happening. So it looks as if, hopefully, they'll be moving to a new civilian government, and they'll be able to maybe fix some of these problems in their country. But at the end of the day, this has done nothing but made the Tuareg rebel groups upset. We just had there was a prisoner transfer, but some of the groups were not happy with that, so those groups executed people. There was a raid on a village. There have been landmines put in the middle of roads. Their kids are stepping on. It's a bloody connect. It's what guerrilla war is, unfortunately. Just to do a quick, do you want to move over to India, Pakistan? Do you want to kind of stay on Mali for a second?
No, we're gonna pause there because I want to kick it back to Ben, where you said you kind of had some knowledge about what's going on around the Lake Chad region. And since we're kind of dealing with the northeastern African kind of like section of geography on the world at the moment, I think that this would be a good time for you to share a little bit of what like you were kind of discussing with the fishing and what's happening with Lake Chad.
Yeah, and so the way I really want to put this is basically, so to put it in a way that's familiar to a lot of like people here today, right, in America, right? What is basically happening there is just a way more accelerated version of what's happening in the United States, right? There's no real opposition, right? There's no real like major challenge to capitalism and the institutions that are sort of stripping away like wages and like necessities from working class folks, right? But it's an even more accelerated version in the Lake Chad region, right? So when you have the Lake Chad region where you have some communities that were able to sustain themselves independently with some farming and some fishing, way away from the main hub. So like the main hub in like, I think it's Niger, it's not Niger. It's Nigeria that's part of the Lake Chad region. The main economic hub is actually closer to the ocean, right? They pipe oil out to the ocean, and then they have the big city that sort of sends things and works with the Americas and things like that. And so, like the community around the Lake Chad region really is sort of economically isolated from the rest of the country. And because there's no sort of institutional challenge to like the capitalist system of that is basically leaving those people like completely economically isolated. What has happened is Al Qaeda, which is basically this giant financing network, to like mostly radical Islamic extremists. They're the only people who are presenting any real type of systemic challenge to the underlying economic conditions of the people under those systems. And so what ends up happening then is a lot of these cities and like start getting taken over by groups. And in their particular, it's actually Boko Haram, right? It's actually Boko Haram that's like the main group, and it's really the only institutional thing that's presenting any challenges to sort of Western influence and capitalism across the board. And so there's a lot of people who are sort of flocking to that because they see it as their only option for like a personal material benefit, which is really an unfortunate reality. But it's kind of the same thing that's happening here in the United States, where you have all these people who are starting to like jump into these really, really radical spaces, like the QAnon space, because there's no real challenge to like the system of capitalism that sort of keeps everybody down. And so that's one of those things where like obviously if I was a person living in the region, grew up in the region, I'd probably be doing essentially the same thing I'm doing now, which is trying to present like, hey, here's this leftist critique of what's happening. Let's set up aquaponic farms and things like that, except for they're basically like 30 years in the future from compared to where we are today. And that's really just like the overall conditions. And so you see a lot of things that are really reflective of that. You see some towns that are trying to maintain the old ways and trying to glob on to the existing governance, and then you see other groups of people that are rejecting the existing governance and siding with groups like Boko Haram. And you don't really see that like critique from the left that's saying, hey, let's set up aquaponic farms while we still have a little bit of water in Lake Chad. So that kind of is the whole condition. And so you see just a lot of back and forths in the region ever since. And unfortunately, in those like economic tumultuous times, unfortunately, what you're really seeing is basically a lot of like young children, particularly like young girls, being like kidnapped out of the area and being like shipped off to other places, like wealthier places in the Middle East for just human trafficking. And then you see like a lot of other human trafficking with like young adults and like young men who end up working effectively as slaves in other countries. And so that's really like the dynamic that you're seeing there. And it's really, I guess, unfortunate to see it happening in the region. And all the while, right, the Sahara Desert is rapidly expanding, eroding into their natural habitats, removing their ability to do the farming that they'd traditionally done, and removing their ability to do the fishing that they'd traditionally done in the Lake Chad region. And so that's kind of like the overall dynamic, I guess.
Yeah, I'll try to pick up and add into another thing that's kind of happening in the region, and you're both wonderful. I appreciate the amount of knowledge that each of you can share. There was quite some time on Twitch where nobody really cared about anything international, and now there are the two of you. You have Dylan Burns, you have Chud Logic. Will sometimes get into international stories, and if I'm forgetting you, I apologize. But it's nice that there are many more people that are more informed than me that can come on and be experts, not experts, be talking heads. We'll pause it there. One that I've been kind of like taking an eye into in the region is Ethiopia has for a long time been trying to construct the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. They are, is that a kitten? A pumpkin? Kitten. Oh, nice. So Ethiopia has been in a long-term plan to develop a hydroelectric dam on the Blue Nile that they think would potentially, somebody can check me here, I think they're trying to get electricity to almost, it's about like 100 million people that they think could benefit from the electricity generated from it. And there has been a huge fight between Sudan, Egypt, and Ethiopia on determining, who has access to the water rights. Kobe, do you know anything about the deal that was brokered back in like the 1970s about like amount of like liters that can be used by each of the nations on the Nile? I don't know the details of it.
So
do you know
I
any of it?
believe that this. So I know very little about the actual details of the deal, but what I do know, what I know about it is that it seems as if it is one of these remnants of the 20th century alliances that existed, where multiple states were under certain leadership that all agreed with themselves at the time. They were able to make these big joint decisions about, say, amount of water that's going to go to a region in a certain amount of time, and then things like the Soviet Union collapses, these treaties fall apart, people change alliances, there's revolutions that happen, and now we have a situation where I believe that the governments in the places like Ethiopia and Egypt are just completely Sisi is it still Sisi or is it still Sisi in Egypt?
Somebody will tell us in chat in a moment. I'm
Yeah.
gonna grab the mic back. So this is where like the the conversation about the Blue Nile has come in. The Blue Nile is one of the larger tributaries, water systems that feeds into the Nile, and Ethiopia has gone forward with constructing this dam. There has been a back and forth about how it's going to be filled, how it would be used during drought season, and so forth. And I think they're now saying that they're going to begin being able to use the dam within about 12 months' time. They've kind of begun feeding it and allowing it to boil up, build up. But what I want to talk about is there's already seeming to be one of these offstream effects of it, or downstream effects of it. So I'm going to link in an article here. It just came out 4 days ago. It's called "Egyptian Farmers Living in the Shadow of Ethiopia's Dam." The TLDR of it is I guess that we could go back to finance capital. Western finance invested in the region for them to grow cotton. And then Egypt, these Egyptian farmers, because cotton is worth more than vegetables, they were growing a lot of cotton. They were exporting a lot of cotton. But what does cotton require? It requires a lot of water. It's a very water-intensive crop to grow. And now that there is a water shortage in the region, the farmers are having to shift from growing cotton to growing vegetables, different types of produce, because this is much, much less water-intensive. This has crushed the revenues that they're making. It's making it basically that they're unable to survive anymore. And you've seen massive amounts of people kind of fleeing what were the once agricultural regions in this area, going towards the capitals, or trying to get to Libya, or trying to go to different places. So there's already been an impact of the construction of the dam on the local communities. And this is just going to continue to be a developing problem over the next decade as the battle for electricity, the battle for water, I think is going to continue kind of exacerbating. Eventually, we're going to move from here to India and Kashmir, but then I do want to bring it all the way back around to something that's actually happening in Peru as well. One of the main rivers in Peru is going through their worst drought that they've had in 50 years, and that's where... Go ahead, Kobe.
I was saying, at some point we could round the trip somewhere to Canada. There's also another climate change cause situation there with one of the native tribes. A very, very sad situation going on.
So is there anything, did we miss any of the water conflicts in northeastern Africa? I'm sure that we did.
There's tons of states up there that all have their own unique histories that I barely understand. So I'm sure there's tons of stuff that I don't know.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say the only thing that's loosely related is because all of these water conflicts over the past couple decades have led to a lot of internal refugee crises.
Yep, IDPs.
That have basically pushed people down into Sudan and the Congo and things like that, where there was already a lot of conflict. And the Congo, they're not in a civil war anymore, but they were, I think it was up until a year ago or 2 years ago.
They still have an active insurgency in the north of the country, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
so if people remember back to 2019, I think, didn't South Africa have to ration its water for multiple different months because one of their we meant internally displaced IDPs. Maybe I'm missing something. But I believe that South Africa also had to do severe water rations because of there was I forget which area went into a drought or which lake it was that almost dried up, but it was down to just completely critical levels that for Cape Town there were a lot of restrictions that were placed on it.
Funnily enough, that goes back to one of the big fucking problems with water in South Africa is because during fucking apartheid, all these fucking white people that lived, they didn't want to live with black people, and so they would just have to create these communities away from the cities that were in places that you can't really, they were not typically populated for themselves, and then they would have to pipe in fucking a million bajillion things of water because they wanted to have these European American looking fucking lawns in the middle of the fucking Transvaal of fucking South Africa, or they wanted to have a massive fucking a swimming pool or whatever, right? Which is one of the things that comes up all the time in South African politics is that it's there's so much of this fucked up part of the country, or the problems of the country because of what they call white monopoly capital, which still has 60, 50, I think between 40 to 60% of the privately owned land that's not government land is still owned by white minority people, and a lot of the people now don't even live in South Africa. They moved back to the UK, but they still own the land in the place. So yeah.
Well, I actually think that might be one of the areas of hope, though, because like South Africa is testing out policies like land reform and things like that to try and I mean, they are really trying to restructure their economy. Um, and I think in South Africa is one of the places where there is some of that leftist critique of the system as a whole. And if that takes hold and motivates the country, South Africa could become like the I guess new African model for right managing water resources and actually having like a real like state that's organized to the benefit of the people. And if that happens there, then it could potentially spread elsewhere, and maybe you eventually see down the line like solar powered desalination plants that pipe water into Central Africa and Northern Africa.
You crushed my monetization of this video with all the F-bombs there, Kobe. No, I'm kidding. I can't.
I was saying, I love. I actually, one of the things that is really cool about South Africa that makes me really impartial, is that right? I think it's a good idea to a multi-party parliamentary system. Is that there's the ANC, which is a coalition between the couple like the COSATU, which is like the trade union, and the South African Communist Party, and then the couple other parties. That's their main bloc. That's been ruling the country since independence. But then there's another party that got started in like 2011 called the Economic Freedom Fighters, who are way far to the left of ANC, and they haven't been able to really like put in a lot of like legislature. They haven't had like a lot of, but they've been able to kind of keep the ANC honest. When the ANC says, hey, 20 years ago you said we're going to do this, it's been 20 years we haven't done this, why are we not doing this? And that's something that I think like there's been a kind of a rapidity. There's been more rapid sense of some of this conversation in the post Mandela era. I think because of the multi-party system they have over there, something that might make our system a little bit more interesting here in America. Might get some of that gridlock up.
Final thing in the Northern African region. How do either of you feel on your ability to discuss Libya? If neither wishes to step up, I can kind of give it a crack. I'm not the best with it.
I mean, like I know that it seems like there's like a billion sides, but it seems like it's the UN on one side versus Turkey and is it Turkey and Russia and Israel now on the other side?
Not Israel. I think the United Arab Emirates.
I thought Israel was Hafez.
I think that they've.
No, not Hafez, Haftar.
I think that they've stayed out of it. I'll try to give this one a little bit of a crack. I'm gonna have to skip like talking about Gaddafi, and that would just take me an hour, and I'm just not the person to do it. But currently, my analysis of like what's taking place in Libya at the moment is you have two rival factions trying to take like the seat of power. You have the Government of National Accord, which is based in the northwest of Tobruk. This is where the quote-unquote like government capital is. This is where the United Nations recognized capital is. Tripoli is in the northwest. Tobruk is in the bottom right. Okay, so Tripoli is where the capital is. This is the United Nations backed government. This is the Government of National Accord backed area. And the eastern part of the country is controlled by the Libyan National Army, which is helmed by Khalifa Haftar, who was a former general under Gaddafi, and he's kind of like been around the game for a very long time. The foreign powers that do appear to be at play are France. I don't know if France has been trying to get involved because of oil that would be maintained by the LNA and Haftar. But Turkey has been very, very heavily involved in trying to back the... Oh, geez, am I going to get this right? Turkey is backing the... Are they backing the G? Wait.
LNA?
I don't... Hang on a minute. Sorry, I want to make sure I get this right.
Acronym game.
Okay, let me get this correct. Okay, I'm gonna... I butchered everything. That's okay. Really, TLDR, it's about oil. TLDR, it's about oil. Turkey needs Libya for its exports, and they need Libya for oil. They've sent exploratory oil groups down there. There's another group called the NOC, which is like the National Oil Committee, who tries to be like the intermediary between the LNA and the GNA. And now there have also been some Muslim Brotherhood fighters that have been potentially coming over from Egypt and moving into the region to be on Haftar's side. I apologize that I can't do this one better. It's just for some reason this has just been a conflict that I haven't been able to keep straight in my mind. And people should pay attention to it. Some of the fighters that Turkey has sent into Libya were the Free Syrian Army fighters that they were using as mercenaries in order to kind of like, have the fight between Russia and Turkey that was taking place in Idlib after the United States pulled out of the region, which we pulled out for the oil and so forth. So they have
FSAs in Armenia now.
Yeah, which we'll be moving to in a moment. There do seem to be some actual attempts at peace talks within Libya. So potentially, maybe it's going to get a little bit better. And we are going to leave this region of the world and then now go to India, where you were about to take us before. I have to go get some water, so don't get me in too much trouble.
Okie dokie. Oh, goodness gracious. Alrighty, so I have been looking a little bit into basically what I've been trying to understand is the way that I like looking at foreign policy is kind of like being able to go like 100 to like 50 to 100 years ago, and then being able to kind of I could explain, know enough that I can explain A to B to C to D to get us where we are now. And so what I don't understand yet is what British Raj really looked like on the ground. I understand it was like a colonial regime, and I can make some guesses there, but I want to understand that more. I'd like to hear your opinion here. Do you think that we're going to see an increase in jihadist activity and kind of international attention in the Kashmir region? Because it seems to be, there's a lot, they've been, this last year, there've been some real big crackdowns on that, and Modi is in power for, I think, at least another 4 or so years until, he has to face the re-election, right?
With that one, honestly, I'm not because here's the thing, I'm not super familiar with the geopolitics inside of India, aside from the I guess aside from the general vague sort of India Pakistan sort of issue, and then the internal politics of India, where there's a huge women's rights movement that is going on in India, and that, to my understanding, that's been one of the largest political dynamics that is playing in. And so basically you have the obvious reactionaries, right? You have the reactionaries who are trying to sort of oppose the women's rights movement, and then you have right, mostly women who are trying to organize the women's rights movement there. And to me, that seems to be one of the larger political dynamics inside of India. I was actually really confused about their dispute with China over their border. And so there's a lot of Indian politics that I'm not really tracking on, aside from the fact that I know that climate change is obviously a major factor, and the women's rights movement inside of India. And so that's kind of where my level of knowledge is. I mean, I also know there's a really split urban rural divide in India that is really important to recognize, where in the rural areas they kind of really want to break from British colonialism, and they're like, we don't want to be British, we are not British, we have our own culture, our own heritage. And then you have the cities, right, with the more wealthier people in India who very much they will only teach English in the schools, and they will literally try and teach their children English accents, right? And so there's sort of that urban rural divide, and then there's the political division along women's rights. And so there's sort of a couple different factions that are all kind of and I don't really know how they intersect with each other, I guess, to say the least.
Yeah, from what I understand, I think that right now the ruling party is the BJP, or is it BJP or RGP? Or
BJP.
It's the BJP, and that is
Bharata something.
Yeah, and they're to put it again, the most charitable you could probably put, ultra nationalists. They believe in I think it's called, was it Hindu Sattva, something like that, Hinduness, which is RJP is the big brother to the BJP. Yeah. That might be, I think there's something about how there's one's a social club that the people send their kids to do weird marches, and then the other one's a political party. I don't know, but yeah, that's one, which is that's the more nationalist ruling party side that kind of wants to see a greater influence of India in the region, kind of. It's being, the real far side is the idea of territorial control places of Pakistan, but I don't know if that's the actually accepted political position of the Indian government. And then I believe that like the big thing that kind of the Liberal Party, which is I think the main opposition party, puts itself as is the which I don't think it's called the Liberal Party, but that's just kind of their politics, more free market, socially progressive kind of stuff. Is their I think that their big thing is like minority rights and women's rights, right? Is their the satiate free market solutions to those problems, and then we'll also talk about this, that, and the other. But then I mean, like I one thing that I think that I want to learn more about, which I don't know enough about, is like I think there's going to be a lot like the more that this rural urban divide is being pushed, the places that are going to you're going to see radicalism of the idea of people thinking that their area is the best. And right now, the Indian government is trying to destroy that sentiment as much as they can in Kashmir, turning off the internet in the area, doing unbelievable amounts of repression and to protests and beating people and stuff like that. And you're seeing just in the last year, what's his name? Jake Hanrahan of the Popular Front podcast has posted a lot of very interesting. There's a lot of very interesting radical movements in the area. There's a so-called anti-fascist movement that uses kind of similar iconography to the American movements that have claimed to do some like minor sabotage on police stuff. There's the Naxalites that are Maoists that have rejected the current Chinese government and like say that they have like pictures of just Chairman Mao up and stuff. Then of course in Kashmir you have Kashmiri nationalists because Kashmir wanted to be its own state after the partition, but then it got taken by India. And then there are people that are not Kashmiri nationalists but are Islamists in the region and want to do kind of have an Islamic state. And in my opinion, I kind of see that China is, I think, probably going to want to not have Islamic radicalism around their borders. I think that they're very that memo, that 2005, there was a 2015 memo that got released of Xi Jinping talking about the biggest dangers to the Chinese stability. One of them was separatism, and the biggest separatist movement is down there in Xinjiang, which I think that I think that a lot from these national security perspective. Islamist movements around the region there is nothing but trouble, right?
So would you say that there's kind of a similar dynamic then going on in India that we talked about going on in Africa and going on in the United States, where you basically have like the people who want like civil liberties and social progressivism are sort of forced to work with the neo-libs, and then the people who want like sort of independence and economic liberation end up for whatever reason going with like the nationalists. And because there's not really a coalition of like the local economic power and social progressivism that would normally be under the sphere of some type of socialist movement, like you basically have that sort of, I guess, Americanization of politics where it just becomes neolibs versus fascists, pick one and there's no alternative. And that, do you think that that's kind of the dynamic? Because that kind of sounded like what you're explaining, but
I think that what's unique in India is that you have a more stratification of religions, where you have Islamism and Islam with groups in Kashmir, and of course with elements of the Pakistani government, and then you have Hindu nationalism, and then you also have groups that are Hindu nationalists insofar as they view that as a form of Indian nationalism, right? That India is a Hindu state, right? So I think that perhaps the characterization of the mix of the neoliberal and the and the social progressivism was a little bit too simple there, and the mix on the other side of the conservatives. I think there is in India, I think there's actually probably more of a stratification on the far right than there is probably on the far left. But the far left, there's the Naxalites, which have been going against the government since like partition, and then other than that, there's there's some small parties, but like it seems as if that is it the Indian National Congress? That's what it's called. It was whatever Gandhi's party was, or the movement that Gandhi started. That's it's a pretty big tent party. So it is like the Democrats in a way. I do see that like kind of like it is you call it the Americanization of politics. I would probably call it like the big tent politics, which is something that seems to happen more as you get this kind of weird lapse of industrialization, which is what we have here in America, where we have rural places that are dying of freaking opioids, and then we have city places that have no places to live and have these jobs where these like gig economy jobs and stuff like this, where you have this weird it seems as if everybody has to kind of, you have so many problems you have to try to find something that will find one party that will address your biggest problem, and then you can put everything else to the side, which I think is it's causing it here, a boiling over of groups of internal tensions that explode, right? You see the Trump people leaving, you see the QAnon people.
Well, and especially in India, like the nationalism in India, like you said, is very, very different because, right, you have a large Muslim population, and then you also have a large Hindu population, and they're each going in their own nationalistic direction. And so they're fighting with each other, and that's not a dynamic you're really seeing in the United States, right? Like it is very much sort of like I guess a Christian hegemony that exists here. So you're seeing like other dynamics at play in India, and plus India is just a far larger population, so they have a lot more unique sort of like intersections of different issues to contend with.
Yeah, that was the thing that blew my mind. I was just looking at a map of the princely states, which was like what the individual areas of the British Raj was called. It looks like a civilization map. If all the maps are on, it's like a 20-player map of one thing, right? It's unbelievable, and it's like, and I can imagine if these are individual states, it's hard to imagine how, I'm like just looking at a map of India, that this is all one place, that all these different people have somehow they've all coalesced. Like, I don't know, like that, it is something that is one of the as Fanon talks about, one of the worst things about colonialism is that colonialism has an incredibly just kind of like it's like the thing, right? It touches you, and then it takes your entire thing, and it'll look like the table, and it will just do anything, but it has this domineering character of it, in which certain types of culture are elevated over other types of culture. And that was something that the British would do, is the British would do divide and conquer, where they would have a sheik ruler of a Muslim state, so that the sheik and the ruling class would always have a divide between the people, or you would have a Hindu ruler and a sheik population, or something like this, right? And it's a very, very dastardly way of doing things that have, of course, led to a lot of the underdevelopment of the third world, right? Unfortunately. Again, to push it back in, to kind of go back to where we first were talking about the Sandabar place in Bangladesh. One of the things that's happening in Syria, that happened in Syria, is there were droughts. Farmers couldn't farm. They moved into the city. Happening in India, people can't live out in the regions they're living for thousands of years, for hundreds of years, moving into the city, and you have a conflict, a smashing of this type of nationalist and this type of nationalist, or social progressives and social reactionaries. That is, I think that typically does lead to these, what we see now, which is like very big political instability happening all over the place, right?
I don't have anything to add.
Yeah, I know. That's one of the worst things about foreign policy, is it is very hard to kind of like editorialize or give your opinion on it, because it's just like, yeah, those are the facts. Hope the bad thing doesn't happen.
I mean, I guess personally, and maybe I'm being reductionist, but I think this is just one of the reasons why having like a global leftist critique is really important. And this kind of goes back to something I had in a panel, a discussion I was having in a panel the other day, where somebody said, was the Soviet Union collapsing a good thing or a bad thing? And they were saying that it was a good thing because they think that having one hegemonic global power is preferable because it leads to less conflict. But I think failing to have a alternative, right, and act like a real alternative, like a unifying alternative, sort of forces people into an impossible decision between really two sides of the same coin, right, where they have to deal with some sort of economic nationalism, or they have to deal with some sort of like neoliberalism, which share a lot of the same threads but differ on like important issues like social progress and things like that. And I think that is leading to a lot of conflict. And so I think without any type of global influence that's providing a real alternative for people to go to politically, it just leads to a lot of these like greater conflicts. And climate change is really just like it's just turning the speed up, right? It's just putting it all on fast forward and accelerating it, everything way beyond